excellent and very, very important win for Wesley. That was a smooth game.
Yeah. Yeah, that was a very good game by Wesley. And yeah, I think HIkaru was a little too fast there with move c5. I mean, he got himself some structural weaknesses and he was never able to solve his problems.
Indeed. And this is another bishop e5 check. I just want to really quickly show Benjamin while the game is still in its opening stages. Some people might be surprised that HIkaru resigned, but it's not a premature resignation. Why not? Because if you look at this pawn on b3, Wesley's going to go knight d4, and he's going to eat up this pawn. He's going to have 2 pieces and 2 pawns for a rook. That is completely overwhelming, and there's just nothing to play for here. So the resignation was justified, and they are literally repeating the same exact line from, I believe, their 3rd game. Or was it
right? But in
one of the early games?
One, HIkaru went d4 in one go, whereas in the previous game he played d3 first. So he gained a tempo, and he provoked this move h6, which I don't know. It's not a terrible move for Black, you would think.
In fact, Wesley played it anyway on his own volition earlier on in the previous game. This line.
All right, so HIkaru going queen d2. I mean, h6 is well protected, so there's no sacrifices.
Okay, we have a
c3.
Trade. Now we can, and bishop a6, offering the trade of light squared bishops, trying to take the sting out of a potential kingside operation. So
yeah,
if I'm HIkaru, I mean, bishop b1 seems a little bit too brazen, and bishop c2 runs into c takes d4. This is a familiar idea, and Wesley has very nicely positioned queen and rook on the c file for that reason.
Yeah, HIkaru cannot keep the bishops on the board indeed. So I think Wesley's done a good job here in the opening.
What about trading and d5, pushing that pawn down, going for the space advantage?
But then after it takes and knight b6, that pawn is very loose.
So HIkaru goes queen d3 first.
Yeah, hitting the rook. Where do you go? Maybe to b6 to grab the open file?
Yeah, if you go to c6, you might run into d5 with tempo, which I don't think Wesley wants. c6 just looks really awkward.
Yeah, I think after rook b6, maybe d5 anyway. Because then after a trade, the f5 square becomes available for the knight. And you shut down the c file. So I like d5.
And HIkaru can anchor the d pawn with c4, and then white's going to be better.
Yeah. Yeah, then black will only be quite passive.
Apparently the correct move here is queen to c6, which makes sense because it defends the rook and it prevents the move d5.
Yeah.
But it's not an easy move to play, to keep the rook on a6 kind of like that. Humans don't like allowing contact with heavy pieces, and Wesley drops the rook back to a8.
Yeah, I think d5 now makes a lot, but then maybe Wesley just goes c4. And where exactly do you go with the queen?
Let's say queen d2.
HIkaru going knight d2. Okay, he's sort of just trying to keep the position, but this, I mean, it feels like Wesley should be completely fine here.
And I think some people in chat were mentioning, why not c4 here? Well, the problem with playing c4 is that it relinquishes the pressure on white's center, and this actually plays into white's hand. So it's just a one-move threat, but once the queen drops back, white keeps a very healthy center. Wesley has to keep this pressure so that, HIkaru doesn't have kind of a blank check on the king side and has to constantly worry about a trade and then queen c2. This is actually a serious idea here.
Yeah. So I like this move, rook b8 by Wesley. He wants to go rook b2. HIkaru dropping both of the knights back. Interesting decision. But I think he's just playing for equality here. Because what can he ever do, right? So rook b2 by Wesley.
And if you go knight c4 here, there is a very nice tactic. Rook takes e2.
And if you go rook b1, there's c4, and suddenly your queen is trapped.
Let's see. So you're saying instead of...
Let's say if you go rook b1 and
c4,
say,
get this rook out of there. Boom! And knight takes c4, queen takes c4, queen takes c4. You don't take the queen and give up the rook on b2. No, you take the check first, then you take the queen, and you are up a full piece. And so HIkaru going knight g3, opening up a valve for this queen to drop back.
But now Wesley trades in queen c2.
This is really unpleasant.
Yeah.
Look at black's pieces.
Because if you trade the queens, then your knight is under attack. You're going to lose a2. So I don't think you can trade the queens. But, I mean, HIkaru's just moved back and forth the last couple of moves. And Wesley has made some nice progress. So this is not looking good for HIkaru here.
Now, a big decision. I was going to say queen a6 seems like a very reasonable move, trying to create counterplay. Of course, it's always a double-edged sword when you do it with a lone queen. But right now, Wesley has to figure out whether, and if so, how he's going to defend to a5.
Right, and maybe a rook to c3, and it's on the board because he's attacking the bishop on e3. Because then knight on d2 will drop.
So if queen takes a5, then rook takes e3, and we're going to have enough. Wait a second, I wouldn't rule that out for Hikaru.
Yeah, that endgame is tricky because you start just pushing the a-pawn up the board.
Exactly. So what could happen here is queen takes a5. I think Hikaru might very well go for it. Takes on d2. You have a train, and you say, well, black has 2 pieces for rook, but don't forget about this little guy. It runs pretty fast down the board. I can guarantee you Hikaru is trying to evaluate this line this very second. Yeah. Will he go for it?
And he could even consider taking with the f-pawn there to make sure that the pawn on d4 is protected. I think queen takes a5. I mean, it's looking tricky, though, because you're leaving everything behind.
Maybe right? Queen takes a5, d5?
And it's on the board. d5, but what is your point after e5? Bishop b4, but I check, I guess.
There's a check on d8 there if the bishop moves, yeah. Oh, I get it. d5, e5, and now rook a3. And if queen d8, rook b8 traps the queen.
Oh, that is insane. And suddenly the queen is trapped, yeah.
My initial idea after d5 is to open up the bishop, but yes, you open up the bishop. The point is that you create an anchor point on a3 and threaten to trap the queen. Let's see if Wesley goes for it.
The d5 should be crushing here. I mean, what does Hikaru even do there? Although, I think d5, it doesn't, like rook a3 is a threat, but apart from that, Hikaru has a move to do something.
Yeah. After d5, I'm sure white has something. It concerns me that Wesley is taking this long because I think if he would have seen d5, he would have seen it early.
Right.
He's definitely thinking also about rook takes e3, trying to evaluate that endgame. In my experience, those types of endgames with an outside passer like this that's anchored by a rook that's behind it, they can get really, really unpleasant, especially with low time on the clock.
Exactly. And yeah, we mentioned this before. Like if Hikaru has a chance, he will grab pawns. But yeah, I think Wesley just assumed that there should be something. But it's not that clear what that something should be.
Well, that something is d5, but is he going to find it? He's down to a minute and a half. And no move so far.
Yeah, he cannot fall too far behind on the clock because there's only a 1 second increment. You cannot really accumulate time. And we've seen Wesley getting good positions before, but not being able to put them away because of the time situation.
He's down to a minute and he
e5 is on the board. So e5, rook a3 just wins for black, right? I mean, there's nothing. Hikaru going rook ec1, giving up the rooks for the queen and knight f1, but it's very passive.
It's passive. It's scary. Of course, the knights are anchoring each other. Rook a1, Wesley going after the a2 pawn, and Hikaru going e5. His idea, rook takes a2, which happens anyway. Queen b5.
Queen b5. Right.
And then Wesley can go rook a. No, Hikaru just drops his queen back. He's worse, but his position is surprisingly solid. And black has a hard time approaching anything here. Despite
where do you go with the knight? Do you go knight h7? That looks very passive.
Maybe knight e8, but same problem. I would go knight e8. He goes rook a3, hitting the queen. Black kind of has a draw here if he wants it. You can just perpetually chase the queen along the a file if you want. With 30 seconds, I wouldn't rule that option out.
Yeah, I mean, I think Hikaru has no way to avoid the draw. I think if he can, he might. Because he's up so much time on the clock, he realizes that the position is tricky for Wesley. I wonder if Wesley is just repeating. I think he's going to make the draw. He's going to make the draw.
I was thinking about knight e4, the positional exchange, the positional pawn sacrifice. We talked about it.
He goes knight h7.
What a gutsy call by Wesley.
Let's see how Hikaru will try to complicate matters here. I mean, he's up a minute on the clock. There's still a lot of pieces on the board. So if he can create problems here for Wesley, they will be tough to deal with. Queen c6, rook e7, king h2 maybe. So then he can move the other knight.
Yep, he plays it. Okay, Wesley dropping both of his rooks back, consolidating. And then maybe the question is, how do you get this knight on h7 back into civilization? The other knight heading for c4. Knight d2 is possible here.
Yeah, you have to stop knight c4.
But then maybe knight c4 anyway. Knight takes c4 and like rook c6.
And there's no tactics, I guess.
And then I take on c4 with a pawn. And if black gets a passed pawn with the two rooks supporting it, things are going to look really bad for white. As Hikaru's time advantage is fading.
Queen C6,
knight
but it walks right into knight C4. What was that?
Yeah, that's a little bit of frustration there. As rook A7 doesn't quite trap the queen.
Yeah, but if you go rook A2, how are you ever going to entangle? He goes rook to B8. Okay, maybe knight D2 now. But then maybe
this might be our last chance to go knight D2, because as you said, if black sticks a rook on A2, this knight it's never leaving F1.
Right, and Hikaru getting down to 38 seconds. Also not a lot of time on the clock. Rook A2 by Wesley.
Yep.
It's
and H4.
I mean, Hikaru cannot move.
Restricting the knight on H7, but it's only a question of time before black unfurls the rest of his minor pieces. Time advantage has faded completely. Hikaru down to 25
H3,
seconds.
I think rook AB2. I was thinking the other rook, which would threaten knight C3. But still,
rook B2 looked very good. Because this knight on H7, Benjamin, it's also controlling the bishop on F8, so you never have to worry about back rank problems. I don't like what Wesley's doing right now.
But Wesley seems unsure here, yeah. Now they're shuffling back and forth. G6, I don't like that move at all. Knight G4, Hikaru coming for him. Knight C3, I guess pawn takes.
And then maybe H5. Hit that knight.
Yeah, he takes with a knight. H5 by Wesley very quickly.
He can also deploy his bishop to H6.
Hikaru wants to go G4. He's going to go G4 to blast open the king side. There he goes,
there
G4.
And the other knight's coming to G3.
This looks extreme. Knight H6 check.
Oh my God, Wesley! He took with check.
Queen
Wesley forgot that it was check.
Defends the knight,
and he's going to lose this game.
Oh my God! Queen F4. This is all over.
What a massive, massive blunder by Wesley, and he might have pre-moved it without realizing. Oh my lands! The bishop was hanging, and he